And it grew dark.
Right. All right. Well, good morning. I know Tanya and Tanya now, but we'll go around. I'm Lindsay Nadeau. I'm a director here at Orr Reno. I chair our government relations and regulated industries group. And then I also do HR counseling and advising for businesses in the state. It is crossover season at the New Hampshire State House, so it's a busy time of year. I'm happy to have Cam Lapine with me today. Cam, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Cam Lapine. I joined Orr Reno 7 months ago now. Prior to that, I worked for the New Hampshire State Senate for 5 years, mostly in health and human services. And I'm very happy to be here this morning.
So Cam's our inside guy. And so we spend quite a bit of time down at the State House. So we just wanted to give a quick update since it's crossover. It's really like the halfway point for legislation. And there's a lot going on. I think especially for businesses in New Hampshire, you know, a lot gets noticed at the federal level with everything going on. But there's a lot that happens right here in Concord that impacts every day for businesses and nonprofits and individuals. So we try to really cast a broad net on what we're going to talk about today, but we have such a small group. We're happy to talk more in depth about specific issues that are important to you. So feel free to jump in anytime. We'll give a quick kind of overview of the legislative process, and then we'll talk about some specific legislation. There is a lot to cover, and this certainly doesn't even cover, you know, half of it. So we do have the handout listing the bills that we're going to talk about. And so if you have any questions afterwards too, just reach out and we can talk more offline. So that's the plan. So in general, just as a reminder, do you remember that little cartoon when you were growing up on like how a bill becomes a law? And so just as a reminder, the same thing, right? We've got the third largest legislative body in like the Western world, apparently, right behind.
In the English speaking.
In the English speaking world is what it says on the New Hampshire government website.
Yep.
But essentially it's 400 members in the House of Reps, which is huge, right? And so you do get a lot of bills each year that come from a constituent concern. And so in New Hampshire, it is a citizen volunteer legislature, essentially. They get paid $100 a year. So $200 per term. Everyone in New Hampshire is elected on a 2-year term, which really means essentially you're always either fundraising and campaigning, or you're calling and thanking people and then fundraising and campaigning again. So that's everyone from if you're one of the 400 reps, or if you're the governor, it's every 2 years. So we're always in election season here, basically. We also have the 5-member executive council, which approves all state contracts over $10,000. So New Hampshire is rare in that we have a very weak executive. Our governor is always one of the weakest ranked. You know, there's different rankings. We're always toward the bottom of the list in terms of power and authority that the governor has. For example, Governor Ayotte, who just took office, is stepping into the role, but is stuck with the commissioners who are already appointed and who oftentimes have 4 or 5-year terms, right? So her term is 2 years. Some of her commissioners have 5, 6-year terms. Which is part of why we have a weak governor, and then also because of the executive council. So really they act almost as like a deputy or lieutenant governor would in other states. That's what the executive council does here. But it also means that there's a lot of opportunity for citizen engagement and for businesses to reach out. I know I used to work in Governor Lynch's office, and he would hand out his cell phone to anyone and everyone, right? And I think most governors do that here. You'll see the governor walking downtown, and you see them all, you know, at events, as well as your state senators and your reps. So, you know, I think there's 2 sides to everything, right? So it's really helpful to have access to your legislators, but it also means that anytime someone's neighbor complains, you'll see a bill, which is why we have over 1,000 bills every year introduced in the state. Each bill in New Hampshire, and Cam, feel free to jump in. Each bill in New Hampshire has a public hearing. So we have, again, anywhere from 1,000 to 1,200 public hearings. And generally what happens is the bills come out with a legislative service request. So a legislator says, hey, I've got this great idea. I want to put in a bill title, basically. So it could just say something like relative to privacy. And you go, what does that mean? And so at the beginning of the year during this filing period, we comb through everything for our clients and say, that looks like maybe it could have something to do with insurance, or maybe that has something to do with charitable giving. And so, you know, we keep a very long list, and then we kind of comb through when the actual bills come out, and we sit down and you just read them all, and you see if it impacts anything of interest.
Just on the titles, they're given the title when the request is first put in. The legislator can entirely rewrite the bill before they give it the final sign off. So sometimes the title has absolutely nothing to do with the bill itself.
Yeah. Frequently, actually. Yeah. And so then you'll have a hearing in the House if it's a House bill, a hearing in the Senate if it's a Senate bill, and then crossover this time of year is when any bill that's still alive in its originating body switches to the other body. Anything that doesn't cross over is typically dead if it doesn't make it through. So the big thing on everyone's mind this year is it's the first year in the budget cycle. So we have been able to enjoy a lot of federal funds coming into the state, and we've been able to have a very cushy budget because of that the last few years. And that's ending. So legislators, the governor, everyone is really focused on the budget and cutbacks. So you probably heard when Governor Ayotte took office, there was immediately hiring freezes, right? Even the courts have put in a hiring freeze recently. Agencies were asked to cut back, and then they were asked to cut back again. So we are currently in the process where the New Hampshire House has taken the budget, which is really contained in these three bills you'll see in slide 7. There's House Bill 1, House Bill 2, and then there's also some House Bill 25. You'll hear us talk about HB 2. That's really the meat and potatoes of the budget. The budget right now has passed the House, and now it is the Senate's turn to meddle with it. And then it usually will go to a committee of conference where the select members of the House and select members of the Senate meet and kind of hash it out. The governor has also already given her budget. Of course, that was quite a while ago now, so she did not have the benefit of the updated statistics from the Department of Revenue. And so the governor's budget is probably somewhere up here. The House budget is a little more dire sounding and like we need to cut much more. And then the Senate will probably be somewhere in the middle there. Typically, the governor's budget and the Senate budget are closer to each other than the House's budget is. But the Senate will have the benefit, right? They're in the middle of it right now. The Senate has the benefit of your March 15th and April 15th numbers coming out. And so they tend to have a more accurate view of what the numbers will actually be. And so it tends to have a little more wiggle room than the House version. But it is definitely going to be a lot harder this year to get a budget passed. There were concerns, even though there's a very large majority of Republicans in the House right now, there was concern that they may not even be able to pass a budget themselves.
And
so
very close to not to. They ended up having, I think, 10 or 15 members walk out of the room rather than vote. So if you're in the room in New Hampshire, you have to vote. You can't not vote. And there are 10 or 15 members of the House Republicans who detested the budget and were going to vote against it, but they were convinced to leave the room so their votes didn't count instead.
So again, politics at its finest. So the budget is really the main focus. And so it impacts businesses in a lot of different ways, right? We did just have some reductions in business tax go into effect, and the Republicans are dead set on having those tax cuts stay. So that's a good thing, but it also means that revenues are down, right? And so that means that they have to reallocate funds and in some cases cut back. So that's really what's going on right now in terms of the budget. It's still, again, early in the process, but there are going to be a lot of government programs that will be impacted that then impact businesses as well, especially looking at healthcare, some of those public services. The Medicaid program is under a lot of scrutiny right now. All of those things that then trickle down and impact the rest of the community. So questions about the budget in general? No. School funding is a big issue in the budget, right? And then the other thing that tends to come up is they will play games, and so they will try to put policy issues into the budget. So you will see parts of the budget, parts of bills that maybe have died in one chamber that the other chamber wanted to pass, they'll stick it in their version of the budget. So it's also a little fun game of cat and mouse where you have to constantly be reading the budget and all the different amendments that come out because they, things will get stuck in there. So you got to keep your eye on it.
Actually, I do have a question.
Mhm.
How do you see this impacting nonprofits? For the most part, I know funding is going to be direly slashed.
Mhm. I think that's it, right? I think funding is going to be cut from different federal sources, but also then from state sources, especially anything related to health and human services. It's by far the biggest state agency and is like the biggest
Over half
line
the budget.
item. Yeah, over half the budget is related to HHS. And so that's really when they're looking to make cuts. It's the first place they start, right? So anything that's tied to HHS, I think will feel the impact a lot. I think in general, you're just going to see things like fees might increase too for certain things, which could impact general business practices. And then things like grant programs could also be, pared back.
Yeah, there's in the House passed budget, they eliminate things like the Office of the Child Advocate, the Arts Council, the Human Rights Commission. There's also an $80 million cut to the university system, including $40 million specifically to UNH. So that could impact, partnerships and things like that.
Research, for sure. So I think, it's not surprising that nonprofits probably feel it even more in these hard times than for-profits do. And so it is something to keep an eye on. And if there are specific bills that pique your interest in here, you can sign up on the New Hampshire General Court website, which is the legislature's website. They now have this function where you can sign up to enlist in a bill. So if there's something that you're particularly interested in, you just hit subscribe to the bill and it will shoot you an email anytime there's an update to the bill docket. So oh, there's a hearing coming up, or oh, this passed, or this got killed, which is really helpful for those big issue items that people want to know about. So housing is the other big thing you'll hear a lot about, and of course it's tied to workforce. So Cam will talk about some of the housing legislation.
Sure. So as I think everyone knows, New Hampshire's in a housing shortage. There is not enough housing. I think I read by 2030, the state will be 90,000 units short of housing, just keeping pace with the current population. And then the housing that is being built is not workforce affordable housing, which is impacting the ability of businesses to hire people and to retain people and to keep people here, especially in, north of Concord. It's bad in south of Concord, it's worse north of Concord. So there's quite a bit of legislative activity, specifically on the housing front. One of them, and there are ways to try to bring the cost of housing down and increase the supply. There's two factors there. One of the ones that I'm hearing a lot about is House Bill 577, redefining ADUs, accessory dwelling units. Think like your in-law suites. Currently, New Hampshire law required them to be attached to the main property. This bill would sever that requirement, so that way they could be, a shed or a standalone garage or something like that, up to 950 square feet, which is decently sized. So that bill passed the House, it's in the Senate. The Senate is generally more supportive of housing bills in general. So folks feel pretty good about that getting through. From more of a building and industrial point of view, there's Senate Bill 4, which deals with a program called CPACER, Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy and Resiliency. Which is a program that's existed, by my understanding, for quite some time, but it just never actually worked. It's a way to, when you build a new construction, to take the costs of your energy, your heat, your gas, or whatever you have, and take those costs and put them basically in a second mortgage that you can spread over a longer period of time. So that way the high cost of meeting energy codes doesn't hit you all at once. That bill has actually already been signed into law by the governor. I believe it was the first bill she signed. They fast-tracked that through the legislature. Senate Bill 84 deals with lot sizes. Something that I've learned quite a bit about is the different zoning codes across communities, where some communities you can build boom, 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 boom. Others have 3, 4, 5 acre lot requirements for a single family home. So this bill would set uniform standards across the state for lot sizes. Based on whether or not you're connected to municipal sewer or something like that, just giving builders more ways to fit more houses on the size of lot that works for the end user.
Yeah, and that's something you see a lot of, it's that the tug and pull between streamlining processes and local control, right? We're in New Hampshire, we love local control, whatever that means. And so it depends on the subject that you're talking about, right? Whether people want it or not. And housing and building codes and regs is something, it's so hard because you have to go before every municipality's planning and zoning boards and get all the approvals, and it's different no matter where you are, and local politics play a big part of it. And so that's something I know, like we have a pretty big real estate practice here, and they're always dealing with the local aspects of any project. So that's a big cost to building more housing.
And that segues perfectly into the next two bills, which I clumped together because they are not exactly mirror, they achieve the same goal. Senate Bill 94 and House Bill 428. They both prohibit municipalities from adopting their own amendments to the state building code. It's called One State, One Code. That way a builder from Hampton knows what they need to do when they go and build in Pittsburgh. This is another very touchy issue in the House between those who support the local control, and it's my town if I wanna have a 7 acre, setback, whatever. But so both of the bills have passed, the Senate bills passed Senate, the House bill passed the House, and now they're going back and forth to work out their issues on that one. Moving on to more like workforce rather than housing, there are two here. Senate Bill 99 is part of a multi-year effort about career and technical education to help people get into the trades. They've realized there's an issue where, let's say I live in Concord, but my CTE program is in Bow, for example. If I still need to be able to meet my core requirements in Concord in order to graduate, but if I have to leave and go to Bow to do my CTE program, I'm not meeting my core requirements in Concord. So this bill would allow students who are in CTE programs to have a little bit more flexibility in their schedule, and to also help them, their science and math requirements for Concord could be met through their CTE program in Bow. So that way they're still getting their education and they're getting that workforce training. That passed.
It's huge, right? I mean, it makes sense. But it's something that's taken several years to do because of the concerns, again, of local control and different communities having different requirements. And wanting to make sure also that we're graduating people who have the right background and who do have the adequate education that they're supposed to have.
And then Senate Bill 244 is a little bit more specific. It's about growing the healthcare workforce. As we know, we don't have enough doctors. We especially don't have enough primary care providers. We especially don't have enough of those, either of those north of Concord. So this is another part of a multi-year effort. I mean, for as long as I've been involved with the state government, a version of this bill has come up. This bill focuses on building a public-private partnership between the state and the Bi-State Primary Care Association. The Bi-State Primary Care Association already operates a workforce center. This would just strengthen their ability to do that, and it would also provide funding for a Coos County Family Medicine residency program, because the research shows that if you do a residency in an area, you're incredibly likely to stay within 20 miles of that residency. So they hope through this bill, if they can get people up there, they'll stay up there, and then they'll make it a more attractive place to live, and then more folks will go there, and then their economy might rebound.
And we have quite a few healthcare clients at the firm, and you'll hear them say, well, we got this great resident who accepted a position and they didn't realize there's no public transportation, right?
Or there's not broadband.
Or there's not broadband, right? And so I think a lot of this is to try to incentivize getting people up north, because they'll see it's a great place to live and to work as long as you can get them there to start.
So that's all I have for housing and workforce. Any questions on those?
I do think that's a big, and so what we've seen, and especially I know the Concord Chamber, the BIA and its member chambers have really focused on housing and workforce. So it's something that I think we'll see certainly for the foreseeable future as a focus. But it is nice to see both the nonprofit worlds and the for-profit world come together and say, what can we do to help build our workforce? I think, it used to be seen as sort of siloed, and now everybody's realizing it's not just healthcare, it's not just manufacturing, it's everywhere. And so really the stakeholders are coming together, which is nice to see.
Also, just on that point about the shifting dynamic, when I first started in state government, the people didn't know what workforce housing meant. They thought it meant subsidized government housing. And now there's been a shift where people realize, oh, it just means housing that the workforce can actually afford. And I think that's been a big shift in the conversation in the last 2 to 3 years. All right, some general business topics here. House Bill 199 would have extended the statute of limitations on civil action related to PFAS, the pollutant most commonly identified with Saint-Gobain in New Hampshire. Currently, it is at 6 years, which is already longer than a statute of limitations for anything else. This bill would have extended to 20 years. In New Hampshire, and Lindsay, being the lawyer here, can correct me. The clock in New Hampshire for damages doesn't start until you know that you should have been injured. So adding 20 years to the end of that would have made writing insurance for businesses virtually impossible. It would have made it incredibly expensive because the scope of exposure would have been incredible. So although this did pass the House Judiciary Committee, the full House did not accept their recommendation there. So that bill it's laid on the table, which in the House effectively means it's dead. It means something else in the Senate.
But what we're seeing is you're seeing a lot more bills increasing liability and potential exposure for businesses. And so this is one of them. We'll talk about some privacy bills that would do the same thing. There's, I'd say throughout the United States and including in New Hampshire, there's a lot more litigiousness. And that's adding costs on businesses and nonprofits and employers. And so part of what we see are things like extending statute of limitations, and it sounds just like a lot of legal jargon, but it impacts your bottom line because it impacts your risk and exposure and your likelihood of getting sued, and therefore also just your cost of having adequate insurance and things like that. So part of what we do is we track a lot of the insurance legislation, but we try to partner also with business entities like the Chamber and the BIA because everybody has really common interests, right? And especially like healthcare providers have, med malinsurance is really difficult and hard to get, and it's expensive. And so the more likely it is somebody can go around suing doctors, the more expensive it's going to be. And so, we try to point that out while also making sure that you have a fair and just court system where if someone is damaged, they get made whole. So it's definitely a balancing act, but we're definitely seeing more litigiousness, and I think the legislature is starting to respond to that little by little, but it's definitely baby steps.
That's a perfect segue. I want to take these out of order. House Bill 733 enact relative to reporting requirements for persons or entities financing lawsuits. So there is a growing industry globally called third-party litigation financing, which is where a otherwise uninterested third party, i.e. a venture capital fund, will find a lawsuit and offer some upfront cost towards the litigation in exchange for a significant cut of the potential reward at the end.
Think of it as like a really big payday loan.
Essentially is what it is, where they're using the civil justice system to turn a profit. And there is virtually no transparency or disclosure or any kind of guardrails or regulations about third-party litigation financing. So House Bill 733 would, in its current form, require disclosure of if a third party is funding your case once you get to court. As it was introduced, it was a much broader bill. It required registration with Secretary of State if you're going to offer these contracts. It set a much stricter bar about how to be involved in a case. The House didn't want to go that far. But this, as it exists now, would help to, I think New Hampshire was classified as a litigation inferno by one of the centers. So this would help to combat that and bring down that risk, because if you're going into court up against a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund, your chances of winning are less.
Chances of settling quickly are much less, right? And most court cases settle. And this just makes it harder to settle and have resolution to a case. We should talk about remote work.
Yep. So I'm going to take these two together, House Bill 280 and Senate Bill 171. So House Bill 280, there's currently a requirement in statute that you pay that an employer pay their employees either weekly or bi-weekly. This bill would eliminate that requirement and allow the employer and the employee at the time of their hiring to reach an agreement on however often they want to be paid. Do you want to be paid daily when you walk out the door? If that works for you, that works for you. That passed the House pretty substantially back on March 20th. Senate Bill 171 required to pay for remote work. There's currently a statute that says that if an employee shows up to work, you have to pay them for at least 2 hours of labor, even if they don't work. The Labor Department is, I've heard, currently interpreting that to mean even remote employees who log on for 30 minutes on a Saturday have to be compensated for 2 hours of their work. So Senate Bill 171 would repeal that requirement. It would clarify that remote employees are not covered by that law, because the intention was that if you drive into work, you should be compensated for that. The House Labor Committee has already heard and acted on Senate Bill 171, and they actually amended it to eliminate the 2-hour pay requirement entirely for any employee. So if you drive into work and they say they don't need you, you're
out of luck.
You're out of luck there. They also added House Bill 280 to it, repealing the weekly or bi-weekly pay requirements. So that'll be on the House floor probably next week.
And what's interesting about both of these bills, right, is employers already have to pay you for any time that you work, and employers, whether you're remote or in person, right, if you're doing work, you have to be compensated. And you can go to the Department of Labor to get a waiver from the weekly or bi-weekly requirement. So I think a lot of this is probably coming from wanting to be more flexible for employers, but also probably, I assume, the Department of Labor saying this really isn't enforceable and it's too murky and we don't know what you want us to do, so please make it more clear. And you'll see state agencies do that a lot. They'll come in and say, hey, legislature, this law is really great, but it doesn't make sense. And we need you to tell us how you want us to enforce it, right? Or we need you to give us rulemaking authority so that we can get into the weeds of the details a little bit more. And so I think we're seeing a lot of that with like workers' comp laws, Department of Labor, and you see it also with like the AG's office when they have to come in and enforce matters.
So moving on to some more general business bills.
Yeah, immigration's a big topic.
And I believe all of these are bills that have been killed. So House Bill 69, there's a companion Senate bill that I forgot to write down that would have required businesses to use the federally verify system. Both the House bill and the Senate bill died in their respective bodies.
Do you use E-Verify? No. That's what I've heard a lot of, especially smaller businesses.
It's cumbersome.
Yeah.
I've used it before with other employers, but it is cumbersome.
Yeah, and that's what the testimony was at the hearing, with that it doesn't actually work. It just tells you if the name is eligible to work, not necessarily if the person in front of you is eligible to work.
There's a lot of workers' comp bills this year that would have expanded workers' comp benefits essentially. The House pretty much has killed most of them. So we don't have to go through them, but I do think those are things you're gonna see come up more. New Hampshire has a pretty low workers' comp rate. Right now it's 60%, and most states are around 2/3, so that's 66%. And so there was an attempt this year. I thought it was probably gonna pass because there really wasn't a lot of opposition to it, recognizing New Hampshire's kind of on the lower end anyway. But it didn't even make it out of the House. So I think that'll probably come back. But again, when you're looking at tight budgets, it's hard to say we're gonna increase this cost on employers, right?
Along with things that have come up before and will come up again, the state minimum wage, House Bill 726 would have raised it to $15 by January 1st, 2028. That also died in the House.
And we'll come back next year because it comes back every single year.
Yeah.
But
So-
I mean, our minimum wage, nobody is making a
No one's
minimum
making
wage here.
$7.25 anyway.
No, I mean, it's hard. It's the same, it's like Groundhog Day. It's the same argument every year, right? Where you have people saying we need a higher minimum wage, and then the other side says nobody follows the minimum wage anyway. And we don't need to worry about it, right? And the market will take care of itself. And both arguments are probably right? That, no one's making $7.25. Like McDonald's is hiring for $15 an hour. So, the market does seem to be taking care of itself. But I think where we'll see it, the rubber kind of meet the road is if we have another recession or something like that, right? And then businesses start cutting back. We'll see if that, average wage falls, but I wouldn't think it'd probably be close to $7.25 given where we are now. I mean, you can't buy a latte for that, it's crazy. So I think it'll come back every year, and it probably, unless the Dems take over, the House and the Senate, I think it'll stay where it is.
Well,
Or unless the
even
federal
when
law
they had
changes.
the House and Senate, they didn't
Like they did,
have
yeah.
the minimum wage,
No.
so.
And then, I suppose the Fed, right, our law says we follow the federal law, so if the federal law changes, it'll change, but,
Federal law hasn't changed since I was 10 years old.
the Fed,
so
yeah,
I don't
that's,
think that's likely.
nothing really passes the feds, right, so.
Well, you never know.
You never know.
Everything
Data privacy is a big one. We've spent hours and hours on this in the past 5 years. We had, effective January 1st, actually a new law went into place. It was Senate Bill 255. And basically, in 2018, New Hampshire passed a constitutional right to privacy. So our state constitution now says you have a right to privacy. And of course, no one actually knows what that means. And so I think the legislature is attempting to put some teeth into that and explain what the constitutional right to privacy is through statutes. And of course, from a business perspective or an employment perspective, you want it to be something that you can actually comply with. And the Attorney General's office has enforcement of the current law. And there's a sort of a easing in period where if there's violations found, they have to kind of put you on notice and you can do a corrective action, that kind of thing. These two laws would be much harder to comply with for businesses. And the second one, 522, would create a private right of action against the state for violations of your right to privacy. So essentially, you can think of states where you have to opt in or opt out to have your information shared. This would be a opt in. So you would have to say, yes, you can share my information. And where that becomes tricky is if you do anything with, handling someone's credit card information, their home address, their date of birth, anything like that. You have to look at, am I sharing this information with any third parties? Not necessarily to be selling it, right? But just, am I sharing it for my business purposes? And then do I have to notify every single person I collect information on and have them opt in for me to be able to do my business needs? And so that's what tends to come up as a problem for businesses. And so House Bill 195 just had a hearing, 522 did as well, but 195 is probably the one that's more concerning from a business standpoint. It passed the House, and I think probably won't pass the Senate if I had to guess, but it's still kind of early to tell. But that's one that could really impact internal business processes, how you comply with the law, and you'd really have to look at your data privacy disclosures and practices. So that's one to definitely keep an eye on. Anything I missed about that?
It's incredibly, they're both incredibly broad and frankly poorly written, to the point where it's not entirely clear. An insurer, for example, might be required to receive an affirmative opt-in every time they send a claim for processing, because that's the individual private information. So as it's written, they have some issues.
So for us, so we take pledge payments, right? Some people are like, I wanna pay on a monthly basis, here's my credit card, run it, set it up. What is then, am I allowed to house their card?
That's the question, is how not only do you disclose information, but how do you store it? And that comes up as an issue. I think it's unclear, frankly, just because of how the bill is written. What I would say is, if you don't already have a privacy statement on like your website or on anything you transact online, I would certainly have a privacy statement added, like a disclosure basically. And then I would also, if the bill were to pass, you would need to probably have some sort of opt-in that says, by signing this, you agree to XYZ, so that you just know that you've got it in writing, documented, that this person gave you authority to use their information the way that you need to use it.
So our pledge form says, I authorize you to run mine on a monthly basis. And then they provide their, and then they literally sign and date it. Is that?
You may need a little more detail in it, depending on what the final bill looks like. To say, I give you authority to store my information, share it with any third-party providers who may need it, that kind of thing. Energy, do we care about energy? It's not really.
Yeah, the lights go on.
Energy costs are, I'll sum up these three bills in 10 seconds. Energy costs are too high. Folks want to bring down cost of energy.
Okay.
Competing ways to do that.
Yeah. Charitable gaming has taken off in New Hampshire. It's pretty impressive. We were just visiting one of the charitable gaming facilities in the southern tier of the state. And it really, I felt like I was in like Las Vegas, like who knew? It was kind of fun. But so it's a way really, and why I think for purposes of this presentation, people care is because it's a revenue source, right? So we're on really hard times, and it's a revenue source for nonprofits, and it's a revenue source for the state. And it's a revenue source for employers, because charitable gaming facilities are actually very big employers in the state. So, in that sense, I think there's a lot of benefit to it. There's also a lot of disagreement about the practice of charitable gaming and if it's good for the state and consumers or not. And so that's always been a debate in New Hampshire and always will be, but I do think we are seeing that space grow, and I think it will continue to grow, especially as we need more revenue.
What's the difference? Can you explain, like, if I play Powerball, that's gambling, versus going to the Revo Casino or whatever? What's the difference? Because the monies from the lottery go to.
So money from lottery in the traditional sense of Powerball, Mega Millions, stuff like that, specifically goes to, it's in the Constitution, to local district schools.
Education.
Whereas the interpretation has been that other forms of gambling can be used for whatever purpose the legislature decides. Historic horse racing is what we currently have. It effectively looks like a slot machine. Lindsay could not tell the difference between it and a slot machine.
I was like, where do you put your credit card? Don't put your credit card anywhere.
But historic horse racing has a higher overhead cost because it involved a complex back-end computer system, whereas video lottery terminals, which is the industry term for slot machines, don't have that overhead. So therefore, the profit would be greater. Therefore, for a nonprofit's perspective, the amount of money going into the charitable gaming stream would be greater. There is a competing, so that the governor, House, and Senate each have separate video lottery terminal proposals, and they each have a different tax rate on them, which impacts the amount going to the nonprofits and charities. They also differ on wager limits. So the governor proposes a $25 wager limit. The Senate proposes a $50 wager limit and the House proposes no wager limit. So if you go with the House proposal and you can put $100 on a spin, that's gonna straight up like that is the revenue outcome there. But they each have their own proposals and that will go to a committee of conference and I'm sure they'll come up with something.
Yeah, I think, and also what you're seeing, back to the idea of local control, is there's bills on both sides saying municipalities should be able to say, we don't want this here, not in my backyard, you can't build a charitable gaming facility here at all. And then you have other bills that say localities shouldn't have anything to do with it and you should be able to just get through the state and have your permit approved, right? And of course, right now, to have a facility, there's not only, liquor licensing, lottery licensing, but there's your, local zoning and land use and all those issues come up. So it is a big lift. So I do think there's attempts to try to streamline the process and at the same time maintain some local control. So that's.
There's also a moratorium on any new charitable gaming facilities until 2030.
And that was a compromise essentially to kind of keep it going and not have it impaled. So I do think you'll see more of that, but that's a big revenue source for nonprofits, right?
So then just to wrap up, I'll hit these last couple bills pretty quickly. Establishing a moratorium on the issuance of permits for new landfills. I'm sure, well, I think many people have heard about the Casella facility up in Dalton that has caused quite an issue. The governor and the House are proposing, the governor proposed a 1-year moratorium. The House proposed a moratorium until 2028. Some businesses have raised concerns that having to truck their trash to Massachusetts or Connecticut or wherever will therefore increase their costs if there isn't local options. House Bill 316, Senate Bill 245 set out of network ambulance reimbursement rates. That comes back to the cost of doing business in general, because if your insurer has to pay 325% of the Medicare rate to an ambulance provider, your premium will be higher because that's very expensive. And then Senate Bill 25 is just a fun little one. Credit union members would be allowed to vote to give their boards of directors pay for serving on their board to try to incentivize folks to serve on the board. The example given at the hearing was like $60 per hearing, per board meeting that you go to, just something to try to get people involved. But that's that. Happy to answer any questions or.
So it gives you a flavor of what's going on, anything and everything. A lot of bills have died, which is pretty typical, but there are a shocking amount that are still alive for the halfway point. And I think, again, what you're really gonna see is the fight over the budget and what ends up getting cut, what ends up staying alive, and that balance of trying to make sure the state is being fiscally responsible while also providing those essential services for constituents. A big piece of the budget is the uncompensated care and dish payments for hospitals. That's a big piece. And there's, always kind of litigation looming around those. So that's something to watch. But I think in general, what we expect is to have a tighter budget and to have a committee conference on it eventually so that it can be finalized. But I do think with both bodies being held strongly by the Republicans, they'll come to some sort of agreement. It just may take a little while. So what I would also say is if there are issues specific to you and your businesses that you care about, let us know and we can, send you little updates. We are constantly over at the State House. So if we hear things too, we can let you know. But there's a lot going on. And I think, this year is all about the budget. And then typically what happens in the second year of the biennium is there are more policy issues that come up. And that's really when some of the more outlandish policy ideas will show up. But typically the first year is really focused on the budget. The second year is more public policy based. So we'll be seeing that next year too.
I know there's a lot of talk about the funding for education, but does childcare is separate from that? So are you seeing anything? Like I haven't heard much in terms of childcare.
That's a really good point. So there is a lot of attention being paid to it more recently. what we're hearing are the workforce and housing issues and just general costs of providing childcare are high, like any business, right? And so I think there is a recognition that in addition to housing, having workforce housing, you need workforce childcare, right? People can't go to work if they don't have somewhere to send their kids. And so there are stakeholders getting involved in meeting on that issue specifically. I know like BIA is involved, the chambers are usually involved. But it's something that you'll be hearing more about for sure. But that, and it includes things like regulations probably easing up, those ratios of, adult to child ratios for different ages easing up a little bit, while still, having a safe environment. But also things like building permits impact childcare facilities. So I think all of it is tied together, but there is definitely a working group on the childcare issue, childcare facilities themselves.
I imagine the same goes for mental health, substance use.
Yeah, and it's interesting, there are efforts to make it easier to become a mental health or substance use provider, essentially. And of course, with that though comes safety concerns, right? And you want to make sure that the right people are providing those services in the right settings. And so there's sometimes, the pendulum swings one way and maybe swings too far back the other way. And so it's finding that middle ground. Mental health and substance use are definitely topics that are under a lot of scrutiny. New Hampshire does have, for example, a mental health parity requirement for health insurers to reimburse mental health the same way you would any other medical appointment. And then also remote parity, so telehealth and things like that also have parity requirements. We actually were one of the earlier states to have some of those parity requirements. But I think, that's something that has helped. But again, we need more providers in the state. And we need more people with access to healthcare. And I think, part of New Hampshire got hit pretty hard with the Medicaid expansion redetermination, as you probably know. And so with the redetermination, a lot of people were kicked off Medicaid and some went into the individual market and some just don't have insurance right now. And so, making sure that people have the services that they need is a huge part also of having a workforce and having, people you can hire as an employer. And so all of it connects, right?
And in the governor's version of the budget, she included $10 million to the community mental health centers. I don't believe that is still in the House version. I believe they gave the Department of Human Services a substantial back of the budget cut. I mean, they just take the money away and tell the department to figure out how to make up for that loss. But that within the governor's budget was 10 million.
Yeah. And the community mental health centers, they also are looking, of course, at the federal funding changes. So there's a lot going on that will impact, I think, the CMHCs. Yeah.
Now increase our unhoused population and may help increase the justice involved population as well.
So it is, the days of COVID relief money flying in are over. The state fared pretty well through COVID all in all, but I think it's kind of back to reality. And so there's going to be budget cuts, and we will see, which populations get hit the hardest. At the same time, I think Governor Ayotte really on in her term announced Coach,
the Commission on Government Efficiency.
right, to kind of like cut that. And so I think, some good has come from that, but it'll be interesting to see if anything really materializes.
Well, the cuts to SAMHSA work has affected a lot of, I work for NAMI New Hampshire.
Yeah.
So a lot of the peer supports, not medical staff, but peer supports are getting cut for kiddos.
Right. Yeah.
And that's hard to see.
Yeah, it is. But I would also say, never underestimate the power of being a citizen going to the legislature and testifying and writing letters and have a sit-down meeting with your state senators, especially, and also your reps, and the governor if you need to. I think people sometimes think, oh, they're not gonna listen to me, but I can't tell you how many times something starts with, well, my neighbor was telling me about, you know, I ran into so-and-so in the grocery store.
When I worked for Governor Sununu, I think every Monday would start with a story of, I was at Market Basket looking at cereal and someone told me about X. And then that would be my project for the week, was figuring out what that was. So I mean, that very legitimate.
Yeah. So I would definitely say reach out if there are things that, you know, you support or that you have concerns about. Reach out as an organization, reach out as an individual, because they do listen.
And there's training available to those that want to advocate. It's free in a lot of places, so
Yeah.
take advantage of it.
Yeah, that's right.
We just had a question come into the chat from Hannah. It says, I've seen some rumblings on creative uses of the budget this year, like nullifying already passed bills with budget amendments. Any inkling on new ways that the budget might leave us in a lurch after it's all said and done? Spaces you're watching?
Yes.
So just one thing about creative budgeting that just struck me is the House budget proposes to shift the Medicaid MCO payments by a couple of days, so that way the 24th payment, because it's a 2-year budget, 24th payment will technically be in next budget rather than this budget. So that way they can say, oh, we're saving X amount of dollars, but they're just shifting the payment to the next budget.
Yeah, things get snuck in the budget all the time, right? And that's part of what keeps us employed, so can't say too many bad things about it, but things get snuck into the budget after, you know, like if it's a House bill that passes the House, but then it gets tied up in the Senate. The House, if there's a committee of conference, will try to sneak that back in, and that's why there is a lot of last minute you know, negotiating, and it's what are the priorities for each chamber, and typically right now, I'd say the House is a little bit further right than the Senate is, and so their priorities are different, right? And you will see, even though one party may control both the House and the Senate and the corner office, you will see disagreement. And so part of it is negotiating. It used to be that the budget was done in a committee of conference like at 1 a.m. and you only had to be there in person, and you know the room would be full of people and there'd be this back and forth. Luckily now they don't tend to do that anymore, and thank God everything's on YouTube. But a lot does happen behind the scenes, and so you have to be kind of ready for anything, and you have to you know, have a pulse on things. So it's hard to know exactly what's going to pop up. Like we just had something that wasn't in the original House version. We watch for it every year. Totally went by, House passed it, and we were like, what do you mean that's in? Like it wasn't in there for the last 2 months, how did that get in there? And so that happens. And so you do have to keep an eye out and just really keep a pulse on things.
There's also a trend of keeping a program in place, but stripping all the funding for it. And then they say, well, if it's that important, the people who care will do it as a volunteer. That's another thing we've seen this year.